we have a very difficult piece at the moment.
Iyar, Samech Tes, or in Samech Tes of the Rebbe Yashab, finishing up on Lamed Aleph.
Right, so we saw the two inyanim in the Savas of the Nivra. We saw on the one hand the inyan of the Koyach HaSeivev, but that's the Koyach HaAtzmi, which is Mahava Mamish Yesh Mi'ayin, and we saw that the Pu'ula of Atzilot, the function of Atzilas, was to be a Mamuta, to bring the Blig Wall and the Medias Ein Sefer the Seivev Korev Elayesh, that should be out of at least be Mafia or Poil, the Inyan Aisavet, the Inyan Etzem Yesh Me'ayin, and we saw that was a necessity in the Etzem Aisavet. And apart from that, there's another Inyan in the Esespheres, but that's the Inyan of the Pnimi, but that's Nimshuk Misfira al Sfira. And that's, it goes, Madrega la Madrega, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya B'derech Idla V'Olu, and that later becomes the Pnimi in the Nevroim Mislavish B'Teichol, as we saw. We found those two nuances in chapter Mem Ches in Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe says clearly over there, the two inyanim. And the Alter Rebbe now writes on Lamed Beis that that's Alidei Hester HaParso, that between Atzilas and Biyah, Gabi the Pnimi, which is Nimshach from Atzilas into Biyah, then there's the Hester of a Parasa. And we've seen the Mila of Parasa, I think earlier here in the Hemshach, that the Mila of Parasa is compared to Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is B'derech withdrawal, B'derech Siluk. Ve'ilu Parasa is that the oil is mamish nimshach into the curtain, it goes into the curtain, it's just that the curtain as a wall almost absorbs part of it and only allows a certain amount to come through on the other side. So that there's a hiskalas of the etzem ha'er kamoishahu in the parasa, just that the parasa only as it were permits a certain aspect of the oil, which is called a Iyar Shel Tulda in the Lashon of Chassidus, on the other side. However, that's only shaykh in an Iyar which is already mitzumtzam in its very essence, and it's already ready to be an Iyar Pnimi. But there, the inyan from Parsa can be mastir. But in the inyan for the Iyar HaSeivev, it's not really shaykh to talk about inyanim from Parsa. No, we saw that there was a inyan that the rotzen, etzem harotzen, is nimshach alidei the esespheres, and the only little key, or by any way that we had some picture how does that function, because when they're going to ask a very basic kasha, how can that possibly be even, how can we say such a thing, was we saw the famous Moshel, but I don't know if it's called that famous, because it doesn't really occur very often, and that's the inyan of the hakua, of the Seivev in the Pnimi. And it's well known when two things, as it were, collide or interact in a severe way, then there's like sparks or hisnetzitzos, but those sparks are in a form of yerida, and the famous Moshe was in Ayin Beis, where the Rebbe brings the hakor of the Chayzer and the Yoshua, which is a very similar idea. He brings over there that when two people are discussing something, one puts forward a very masudadika idea, but somebody else on that a kashia. But then that kashia is like a collision of another oil with the oil of the svara which has already existed, and then eventually the person who put forth the svara answers a teretz, if he's an emissary. And that teretz is like a spark which has come up because the kasha brought it into being. However, usually it involves some sort of a compromise, like, he has to somehow or another take into account the kasha and have to build a svara in some way recognizing the point made by the makshon. Right, we see in the Gemara. But the makshon is the one who asks the kasha. Therefore, we see that what occurred was a Yerida in the original Sfora, or being a Nitzut of it's the same Etzem, a Nitzut is the Etzem, but it's only a certain Yerida from the richness of the original Sfora and somewhat weakened by the power of the Makshon, the Kasha. So in a similar way, the Iyar HaSeviv, V'yochel, gets, as it were, sparked by its having hit or being, as it were, approached heavily by the contact with the Iyar HaPnimi, and there's a certain Yerida in the Iyar HaSeviv, a certain spark which he, as it were, goes off, but he's now in a lower madrega somewhat than he was earlier, but he's still in a even for an Ein Sof. And that's the idea of the Esses Filas, that Silas, as we're carrying over the Iyar HaSeviv in such a way that he becomes Fi Erat, that he could be Mahava, the Yesh of Biyah. So that Kufa is a very sort of puzzling idea. How can a Dover, which is ultimately speaking Gvul, how can it carry over a Dover Bli Gvul? How can it be a medium to be Mamshich a Dover Bli Gvul? Because the Rotzain, which is the Seviv of Kalamin, is Bli Gvul. How can one be a medium to bring over the Diada? And that's what we're now beginning to. That's we're beginning now.
I'm curious how we say that the collision of these lights brings the kalim into being. If at first glance, the both things had to be there in order for the kalim to come to be. So my question is, like, didn't the bigger light
kalim, I wasn't discussing. I was talking about the Iyar. It's not so much the kalim. I didn't mention the kalim.
Either way, I mean, my question is, how does the Or Soviv create the other light and then it collides? I don't understand how.
Yeah, they meet together, but they meet in the form of a drastic meeting together, each one as it is. What the Mamali is be'etzem adova mukbal, and the Iyar HaSeviv is be'etzem adova bli gvul. So they, as it were, they don't get together. They can't get together. So that's called a hakoah. It's called like a collision.
Doesn't one precede the other and create it? Doesn't one precede the other and then create it?
No, there's no time in these inyanim at all. It's not the shaykhs that one comes and then waits for the other to collide with it. They're two giluim from the Eivishter, but they don't sort of come together, because once they come out of the Eivishter, each in its own way, then they don't get together. So they're always there, because just like the Eivishter is always there, they're always there. I think you're taking the whole idea of the collision too Megushin. You're taking it too physically. We don't mean physically that there's a wire running around upstairs, another wire coming, and they bash together. That's not what we mean. What we mean is there's a Gilui Elokei which is too iron, and there's a Gilui which is Mugbal. And how do they sort of react if they, as it were, both there? As Giluim of the Eivishter. So we say that they react in a way that they Kilu hit one another. Or they cause a Yerida from themselves through having met in a way that they're not able to get together, because by definition they can't get together. Alright, that's what he says now. He says, L'choira eino muva. The whole thing is not understandable, because however we say the Pshat, we say that the Esses Filas of Atzilas, they act as a medium by which this Iyar Bli Gvul, the Iyar HaSeviv, the Rotzen, comes down and it becomes shaykh to the Isavas Yesh Mi'ayin. Ek shaykh mamutza bein beis dvarim shebe'ein hareich. How can you say a mamutza between two things which are absolutely be'ein hareich? Now, you can ask on that gufa, well, every mamutza occurs where two things are ein hareich. For example, why do you need a maturgaman, for example, between the Rav and the Makabel and the listeners to the Rav? Because the Rav is too high and the listeners are too pasha. So that's a form of ein hareich. However, in ein hareich itself, there are many levels and many what you might call gradations. And when we say that the Rav, Legabi, the listeners, are ein hareich, we only mean that within the realm of human achievement, that he's achieved everything a human can achieve, and they've only just begun, or they're not really able to, for some reason, to achieve what he's able to achieve. But it's all within the realm of what you might call human greatness or human ishtadlus. It's all within the realm of the Iyar HaNoida LeNivroim. So therefore it's only ein aroich in a relative way. Of a bli gvul, emes a bli gvul, emes a er aseivu. Like Gabi the spheres that they are and Atzilas, what they're already einim from gvul l'chayra. And the oir mislavish poem is already mislavish mamish, even from oir pnimi, then how can one of those be a mamutza legabi the other that is completely and utterly ein aroich altogether? And therefore you can't have something which is a einim from gvul being a mamutza for something which is absolutely bleakable. It can't function because immediately the bleak will be maya into that. There'll occur, either the oil will be batil completely, or it just won't be able to come together. There'll be a form of, like we spoke before, a form of like hitnakshut, like clash. But how does that function? That nonetheless there comes of that nitzutzes, which are already able to be like a urida in the bleak wall. That itself doesn't make any sense. So therefore he says, because ultimately the issue here is the nivroim and Oirein Seif. The Tzokos of the Eivishter, he's ein Oirein Seif Amiti, and he wants to bring about the Nivroim. And so he has a rotzen to do so. The rotzen is a gili of his ein Seif. So how do you get there from his rotzen, which is mamish ein Seif, and it's ilakus b'shleimus, in other words, b'shleimus amuvan of ein Seif, is how is it that from that you get Nivroim, what Nivroim are mamish dvorim balik vul, and they don't really have any emes of Matthias like Avialakus. They're completely and utterly betailim b'Matthias, and elim ko inyans from Matthias klau. So how do you get from emes of bleak vul to a ina which is gvul ad kadikach, that it has no status whatsoever, like the Eibishter. So therefore that's the difference between Nivroim v'Erein Seif. Shezeu b'chinas gvulu bli gvul. In other words, that's a modest way of putting it. The truth is, to call the Nivroim gvul, that's already a sort of modest treatment of the Nivroim, legabi bli gvul. And therefore he says that at least ha'ina from bli gvul, legabi bli gvul, is ma shayach mamutza pozeh. What is shayach a middle intermediate point, which will join the two together, to mimonoshach. Whichever way you look at it, it is a kasha. That's a lesson from the Gemara. The mimonoshach means either way it is a kasha. Oi kuli gvul, oi kuli bli gvul. Yeah? He said either it's all gvul, and then you can move from one to the other in gvul, or it's all bli gvul. And if it's all bli gvul, then you've just got pshitas. You can't talk about moving from one level to the other. So you can't get the bli gvul to somehow or another all of a sudden come down and be gvul, when you can't have the gvul will go up and be bli gvul. So the Rebbe says make you sort it out. Either say that you're talking about bli gvul or you're talking about gvul. How can you have a mamutza between bli gvul and the Nivroim, which are, to call them the least of it, gvul? So he said, make up your mind. Either it's that or it's that. The midah mumutzas bein gvul and bli gvul eino shayach l'choira. A midah mumutzas, meaning a measuring point between, like a go-between, between bli gvul and gvul, is not shayach, it would seem. L'choira doesn't make any sense. It's in Cain, bechinas atzilas gufa. So it comes that the kasha is in atzilas. Or shehu bechinas bli gvul, or bechinas gvul. You have to make up your mind. Either Atzilus is bli gvul, and if it is, then it's very difficult to picture how it could be as a spirit, or we say that it's gvul, and if it's gvul, then fine, that's a koyach gvul from the Eibishter. Or how does it get together with bli gvul to the point you say it becomes a medium to bring over the bli gvul to the absolute gvul in the lowest and most positive sense that you can say the in and a gvul. So therefore, the world which you're trying to say is the mamutza, it has the same kasha. Either it's bli gvul or it's gvul. In other words, if it was just another inyan in gvul. That was a higher inyan gvul. That was a lower inyan gvul. Then we talk about it being a mamutza. If the higher point is bli gvul, and what comes out of it is mamish nivroim, then how can you possibly say that Olam Atzilus is a mamutza? Ve'echu mamutza bein bli gvul ugvul. They should be able to give over oil of chayas from itself. Yeah, from the lower point into nivroim, what they are bali gvul. That's one of the, as we said, that's one of the more, what you might call modest aspects about nivroim, that they're bali gvul. Yeah, they're mamish einem b'matzias amitis v'chuli v'chuli. And how do you get from that to that? In other words, how do you get absolutely from bli gvul into ayinim from gvul by the mamutza of a thing which either it's one or the other. Pirush the l'chara ein mamutza bei neher. And b'derech klal, normally speaking, when we say that the Eibishter was mahave yesh mi'ayin, and we say ein l'chara was eina roich. What's the whole necessity? What's all these shtadlers to make a mamutza in the? What's all these shtadlers to make a mamutza in the middle? Just say that the Eibishter made the world ein roich. He's called yochel. For him, it's absolutely no bayah that he can just be mamutza the oyer hasheichel and nivroim, or even without her, he can just be mamutza the nivroim. Kamoy shaheim, and he will remain what he is, and they'll be what they are. And Wujha B'klal is the necessity for this whole mamutza in the middle. B'derech klal, that's what we say. B'derech klal, we say that the yesh mi'ayin is eina roich. So that kufa is a shaila that needs a little bit of treatment before we go much further, because we saw at the end of the last page you have the koyach ha'isavas, well, that's the koyach ha'bli gvul, and that's what actually makes yesh mi'ayin. And then there's this other inim which is nimshach into the nivroim, b'derech pnimi, and they need, as it were, both. Why do they need both? To say that the oil safe is mahavad yesh mi'ayin, and that's all. What do you need a oil pnimi for b'klal? What do you need to have a whole oil which is yer v'nimshach b'teichom, etc. Here it's in another form, the whole hezbollah. Here the hezbollah is to say that in order to get that oil which is mahavadim, even ein roich, you also went from mamutza. You brought the rotzen down in such a way that it came closer to them. So what do you needed to come close to them? Learn to stay away from them. It's not the kol yochad there, you can do anything. What do we need this whole mamutza to come down closer? And what do we need over there? Then we have an pnimi, like we just said here, because it's all based on the same basic principle. That we're not doing everything in a way which is just absolute ein roich. We want to somehow or another make it near to the nivroim, and even to give them a chayes pnimi b'teichom. So the answer is very simple, or very poshut. The answer is that the Eibishter could have made, and in some way he did make the bria completely ein roich. Like we see in that center. However, if it would remain that that was the only function of Elokus in the bria and in the Yisavas of the Nivroim, then the Nivroim would never have any kesher klal matela, because just by very definition, if you say it was absolutely ein roich, that just by simple definition they could never have any kesher with Elokus, and so they would just be Nivroim. V'lav davka, they would even know. There wouldn't even be any spora by them that they came about from any mocker. They wouldn't even know from whence they came. And it could be that a few of the seichel would also not necessarily tell them that, because the seichel would be b'efen acher. The seichel wouldn't b'klal be b'derech shanaton makirim b'zeh. And the fact, with the Eibishter barov rachamov or barov chasodov, the Eibishter made it. There was a whole other gilu of Elokus, the hainu akiruv to everything. Mitzad the atzmiyusay. Now, ainin of tzimtzum v'yirida of a kiruv to the nivra, that should eventually be able to be mislabish b'toichay. And that's the pnimi. Here we're not talking about that, but we're talking that nonetheless, even the rotzen has got to come down somewhere and be near to him. It's got to come down and be miskarev to him, so that ultimately even the rotzen came to him through mamutza of something which is much closer to him. Lamazeh. So the answer is that ultimately we want that the man should be able to know about Elikus. And we want that he should be able to go, the famous Torah, at the Magid, where the Magid said the Eivshter made all these houses, Hamateregiz me, Yeridim me, Ilal me, Oilam, in order that the man should be able to go back up the whole thing and eventually come to Elikus.
Isn't even like the or in regards to the Atmos made in a way of Yesh Ma'ayin? So
yeah, that's another mind. That's another mind.
Yeah,
even the way how it's nimshik mea atzmus is not be'emes a ha'ora in the usual sense. For purposes of argument, we talk about it being a ha'ora. You're right. Here. I mean, it's a point. Anyway, back to our Nakuda. So that everything is like a ladder. The Eivshter came down a ladder in order that the man should be able to go back up there. Yeah, he should be able to go back up the ladder, and therefore there's all sorts of inyonim where the Eivshter made that mitzad him, he didn't need to make it klal or klal. Lo היה צריך לזה klal. אבל the oil pnimi was purely for the sake of the Adam, that he should be able mitzad his koiches, that the Eivshter wanted a limited individual, that he should be able to be masig, ultimately speaking, Elikus be'amitia. And that's the union of Dira b'taktoinim. Those are the pshat, Dira b'taktoinim. A mensch that he is mamish taktoin, mugbal, like it's put in Perek Lamed Vav, the Alter Rebbe says, Ein takton lamata himenu. There's nothing lower than that, nothing more poshut and limited than a mensch. And after he becomes a Dira loyes baruch, he becomes mamish that the atzmis can be mislabish in him, and he knows about it. That's the pshat. And he will know, and he'll eventually become even able to know even the atzmas. And that's what's going to be Liosid. Well, obviously, if he hadn't started off with this whole union of the Apshnim, then he wouldn't, by definition, there would never be any chance that we would know. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says in Shara Yuchid, Perek Hey. But that's what he says over there, that the union from Yediyas Elikus is alidei hatzadikim, alidei oisus u'moyishim sheba b'Torah. In other words, even with our pnimi, we don't always chap. It's not always easy for the mensch to see. And the Father Eivshter makes nisim. He pushes you in the eye. As they say in Yiddish, stecht in the Augen. But he pushes in the eye. You become to realize that there's something going around here. And the next thing is tzadikim. In other words, the Davka Alidei Rebbeim and Alidei Rebbe, that's how you come to know about higher inyonim. Otherwise, who would mit herumdrehen, who should it man wissen? Man nicht da. The side Nisim, what that's mitzad Numayla Matzayim, Numata Lomayla, Alidei the Tzadikim, the mensch, Pnimi, he starts to know that there's such a thing as Elikus. I mean, just imagine if there hadn't been for the Rebbe, when I say had not been, if there weren't for the Rebbe, what would you know? Ma Tatita. It was Kurdish nicht wissen. Herumdrehen dort in Flatbush or Brooklyn, ich dort mit was. Right, and some you'd be puffing away at drugs and you have half a foot in the grave, the majority of dementia. Das ist das greatest of all. And what was Tutzchop in the heintige Welt, what's happening with the skate forward with the other masses. I feel here in the army they got one trouble with drugs and that's auch in on him. This is Oyum Venoil. And now they're all beginning to say, why did we give him a better education, and why didn't we that, why didn't we something? Well, I've nicht der Rebbe, I've nicht Elikus, Alidei Rebbe, weiß man für Gott. Yeah, I mean, that's the necessity for the Pnimi, that you should be able to have the nuance if it's given to you. That's your Bechila, that's what we saw, there has to be a Bechila. You have to make your choice, you have to be able to do it yourself. Even though it's only a hide and seek of a kachazeh. And my mother says the Rebbe, there has to be this union, even in the Rotzen, even when the Rotzen comes down to be, it's got to come somewhat close, that even in the Rotzen a mensch have a hasoga ultimately. You'll have a musik, and he'll be able to know how the Eivshter, as it were, brought him about. I feel mitzad, that I say you have. And that's what he says in the Rebbe, that you got to know about Tevim Kolam. You have to know about Mamad, but you got to get up at the That's the ultimate picture. And says the Rebbe, that's the union. Oh, but now we're asking the question, how does it work? Eggs are boiled. Mainly in the Panimi, where it goes from level to level, it goes all the way down. Mamish Panimi, where Matumtum, Lafia, Stauschel. Okay, Stauschel. Oh, but we're talking about the Iyar, the Etzeminian of the Rotzen. And you want to say that comes down in a kiruv to the Nivra. How does it come in a kiruv to? Oh, Atzilus. Of Atzilus is weiter Stauschel. How do you get Blivu coming over in, which is ultimately speaking, even from Gvu? How can you translate Blivu that day? Gvu. Umbafrat, the Alter Rebbe brings in Perik Mem Ches over there. That if you take trillions in number, right? And you put it against bleak wool, it's picked as if you won. Mamish as if imagine you had a trillion marbles or something, right? And you held them against bleak wool, it's picked as if you got one marble. Look how we bleak wool. Oh, you don't have anything. And I was a bleak wool and wool. Mishpah, with bleak mishpah. Einless a yachas klar. And remember, this is the kasha. How can you have that those spheres are mamutza to bring the rotzen down? Maybe to bring their own cells down, that's for staying. Or to bring the rotzen down. Exercise. And if that's the kasha. Once you got blivu, be medium to which gvul is translating it over, then that doesn't go. And if says the Rebbe, in order to understand that, we're going to now deepen ourselves into the whole picture a little bit. And that is the following. Ayininu tehine yadua de esespirus tatzilus heim beginas elakus mamish. Vehein vezehu ma shatzilus mudo be'erech mibi'ah venikro eish. Canal at the beginning of the last month we had it in Anechi. Yeah, but the Rebbe brought down that the four Yesides, Eish, Ein Ruach, Eish Ruach, Mein V'Ofa, or they can get the Arba Elamas, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah V'Yah, Atziyah. And he said that Atzilus was connected to Eish for what? Because Eish, the tendency of Eish is always to go Lamaila and Be'ela Lamaila, and not even for Beetle Legamre B'Shorshei. And he brought out in into the Eish, but Gachelis has to be always there in order to connect with the Eish Michutz Gachelis V'Chulu, as I hope, or maybe we can trust, or maybe we can believe. Naively or not naively, that somebody remembers or looks back a little bit on things that we learned in the previous mind. So therefore said the Rebbe, that's the union of Havdolas HaErech of Atzilus. Why? Because Atzilus is BMS, divinity. It's the Eibusha. Lefisha Biyah, Heim B'chinas Yesh Mamish. V'Atzilus Hu B'chinas Elakus Mamish. In other words, it's two absolute antitheses, one to the other. The highest point in Olam HaBriah, Lagabi, the lowest possible point in Atzilus, Ein Lehem Kol Kesher Ve'erech, one to the other, because that's Elakus, and this is Nivra, and Elakus and Nivra just by its definition, two Hafochim altogether. Omikom, okay, so that's you might call the first little nail or tack that needs to be hammered in. Do we have to remember that basic difference? When we talk about Atzilus, B'kol Mokim, Shenadaber, Atzilus is Elakus. Both the Kelim and the Yoyres are all Elakus. Even though we're going to see Pilintik Zachen, when I get to the Kelim, it's all Elakus. It's all divinity. Biyah, Nivro. Nivroim, Ein Kol. It's not even the same way. You can't even talk about it. It's a Kol. And if that's Eish, and Biyah, is already the union for Mayim and adequate offer of a Kaitzah, depending on which particular oilam you happen to be in. So however, the other way around, Haraya Esas Filas Tatzilas, Heim B'Pchinas Mida V'Shiur. V'Hainu, Masha Heim B'Pchinas Chochma V'Chesed. Shezehu Mida V'Shiur Yodua. בבחינת גבול והגדורה במהוס החוכמה ומהוס החסד. והחוכמה אינו חסד, והחסד אינו גבולה וכהי gavna. So the Rebbe said, Emes, Atzilus is Elikus, and yet nonetheless we see that there's an iner from mido v'shiur in Atzilus. Now that's kuriyom moiti. Mido means the idea of measurement, and shiur means the iner of definitional limitation. For example, you say a thing has a shiur, you mean it has its own size or its own thing, and with that it's different from something different from some other inyan, even though basically they might be the same material. For example, you got food on Yom Kippur, and the shiur is a kekoisabes. Normally, the shiur is a kazayas, even though it's the same basic entity, but it has different shiurim, and that difference, it's all status, and it's all in one from the other. Therefore, midah v'shir indicate an interdivision between things in a form of midah and limitation and gvul. V'hainu, how can we say that? We can say that what is the midah v'shir in Atzilus? We're only saying this now by way of opening the picture. And we can say that what is the midah v'shir? That you got spheres, and one sphere is the sphere of Chokhmah, another sphere is Bina, and another sphere is Chesed, and another sphere is Gevura. So each of those spheres, maybe we can suggest that it's Mamish Ein Seif, in its actual Ishpashtus or derivation into Gilui. But by definition, Chokhmah is not Chesed, and Chesed is not Gevura or Kahagam. What is there, as it were, the Gvul, is that one is one Inyan and one is another Inyan, but each Inyan in its own right is, how do you call it, Ein Seif. They should collide one with the other, they should never be able to get together. That's what happened in Tohu. And therefore the wondrous thing in Atzilus is that even though we may be going to suggest such an idea that they're all Ein Seif, but nonetheless the Eibishter makes it that they're able to interrelate. And that's the wondrous gilui of the koyach ha'amiti of the Eibishter in Atzilus, that he joins them all together, even though there ain't safely his pashta shalem. So that was the Rebbe Makom. Okay, das is Chokhmah, das is Chesed. Shezeu midah v'shir yodua. That's a shiur. It's like a how do you call it, a size or a measurement which is well known. B'chinas gvul v'hagdora. What hagdora means, the idea of a definition, a definitional idea, a definitional status. So says the Rebbe, it's not mamish in a way gvul, because it's only by definition that they're different. That's Chokhmah and those, but you can't very well measure Chokhmah, or you can't measure Bina in actual measurement. You can just say that is that, and it's not that. And he says, well, that's the inyan of Mahus. It's an entity and an essence of Chokhmah, and an entity and an essence of Chesed, and each one of them differentiates itself from the other. V'Chokhmah ein of Chesed, v'Chesed ein of Gevura, kahai gavna. V'hainu, so the Rebbe b'chinas ha'kelim da'atzilas, shehem b'chinas Chokhmah, v'Chesed u'Gevura, v'mikol mokim harehem elakus mamish. The im hi shehem b'chinas Mahus Chokhmah, v'Chesed u'Gevura, ein ze shehem b'chinas Mahus ha'metzias tova mamish. Moy Chokhmah v'Chesed b'yah, shehem b'chinas yesh. Ma shein kein Chokhmah v'Chesed ha'atzilas, ein melakus. Avamina said to Rebbe, the whole inyan now is not so much measurement, but inyan. Inyan of Chokhmah, inyan of Chesed, and each of those kilo is by its own definition separated from the other. Of Einochanami, they themselves are Ein Sof. So the Rebbe said, where do we have that? Where is that true? In Kelim. He said, in this whole concept of the idea of Kli, but not in Oyer, because we're going to see that Oyer, wherever it is, Oyer remains always in an oven of Shitas and relatively speaking, believe even the Gavida Kelen. Now, when I say relatively speaking, we're going to define that also. I will suffice it to say that the inyan of the Iyars is what we call pshitas. Now, that's going to be a very key svara. The Iyar always remains to a certain extent not limited in anything, and only when it enters the Keli it becomes shy to Chokmah or Chesed. We're going to meet up with a famous Moshe, but the part is what he says: when you put water in something which is coloured, then it takes on the colour of the thing you put it in. Meaning that the Iyars don't really have these inyanim in them, but they have an ability to enter the Kelim, and they take on, at least for the purpose of Gilui, they take on the colour, as you might say, of the Kelim. And therefore the Ikka Inim, which is Chokmah, not Chesed, or Chesed, and not Gvura, this is the Kelim. And the Iyars just get affected by that, but they're not mamish like that. And the fact is that Rabbi Be'ikah is what you might say to blame the whole thing is on the Kelim. And therefore he says, where are we? The mamish the imi yesh hem beginners mahus chokmah chesed gvura, v'hainu beginners hakelim. Even though there are mahus of chokmah or chesed or gvura, ein ze shehem beginners mahus of matzias dova mamish, k'moi chokmah v'chesed de biyah shehem beginners yesh. He said, chas v'shoven to say that the chesed or gvura or the chokmah or bina, how it is in Atzilas, is like the chokmah or bina, how it is in Biyah. Here we've got to be very careful to differentiate in our minds, because we, being as locked up in Biyah, we tend to see everything the way we understand it. So that was the Rebbe. When I say that chokmah in Atzilas, and I say there's chokmah in Atzilas, but it's not chesed, it's not gvura, I don't mean chokmah the way you understand chokmah. Because the way you understand Chokmah is ayesh, of a nivra. It's a nivra's Chokmah. Mashenkin, the Chokmah in Atzilas is Elakut, the Keli and the York woman. Yeah, they're a from Elakut. And therefore, what is the inyan of Chokmah mitzad the Keli in Atzilas? So therefore he said it's not an inyan from Matthias Dova, Kemoi Chokmah v'chesed de biyah, shehin b'chinas ben yesh. Mashenkin Chokmah v'chesed Atzilas, shehin Elakut. They're mamish the divinity, or Kamayim, you say it every Friday, Antu Chachim, v'loi b'chokmah yeh. In other words, that you are Chachim, you unite yourself with the Keli of Chokmah, meaning the Eibishter, Chachim, v'loi b'chokmah yeh. But it's not the type of Chokmah that we, no, not in Chokmah Yediyah. The Chokmah Yediyah means known Chokmah. What is known Chokmah? Chokmah down here in Biyah. If I'm the way the Eibishter unites himself with the Chokmah, how it is in Atzilas, is not the way we understand Chokmah. Mashenkin Chokmah d'Atzilas. He said, Imi yesh Chachim, even though the Eibishter unites with that, Mikol Mokim, ein b'bchinas Chokmah, b'bchinas Matzias Mamish. Kizeo Masher Kuz Gufa, who b'bchinas Chokmah. He said that's the way the Eibishter becomes Chokmah. And we made up with a very amazing idea that the Eibishter Kaviyocho, he himself allows himself to become Chokmah. He himself unites, and that's the Taich Antu Chachim. Ant means you. You become Chachim. Yeah, you unite with Chokmah, but it's not for Chokmah Yeh. Yeah, not for Chokmah Yediyah. So let's just go just a little bit further, and then we'll try to define what we're saying. Kizeu, says the Rebbe, ein b'chinas Chokmah b'chinas Matzias Mamish. Kizeu masher lakuz gufa, hu b'chinas Chokmah. V'lochein ein gam kein b'chinas ein seif. Since it's a lakuz, therefore, even though each one has got his own definitional state, nonetheless, each of them is ein seif. Lochein hein gam kein b'chinas ein seif. Akameisha kosev b'seifi Yetzirah. Yeah, it's right near the beginning of the Sefer Yetzirah. And some of them are Kabbalim called the Mishnah Sa'amokim, because it talks about Oimek several times in this Mishnah. It's one of them they call the little statements in Sefer Yetzirah Mishnah, because they're very, very primordial in history. they're actually attributed to Avraham Avinu, and therefore they're called Mishnayos. All the Mekubalim call them Mishnayos. Therefore, it's written in the Sefer Yisira, in one of the very early Mishnahs, called the Mishnahs Amokim, Eser Sfiras Belima, that the 10 Sfiras that they are in Atzilas, they're Belima, they're without any state. Beli, how do you call it? Belima, Beli definition. Midoson Eser, however, their number or their measurement is 10. She'ein lahem seif. Yeah, and they don't have any end. I mean, that is just one series of contradictions from beginning to end. First of all, you say that you've got Eser Sfiras. Now, Eser Sfiras, means 10 of them. And then you say they're Belima. Belima means they have absolutely no definitional status. They're just sort of like completely and utterly without any. Belima means that they're like Pshitas. This concept of Pshitas, which means that they don't have any state at all. Then he says, Midoson Eser. I mean, you just said Eser Sfiras. Now you say, no, Midoson. Yeah, Eser. And then you say, Shein Lem Seif. First you say there's 10 of them, and then you say Midoson Eser, after you told me that they're Blima. Yeah, and then you say, oh, just by the way, Ein Lem Seif. You can't have your cake about twice and eat it 3 times. You can't do that. He said, was it against a beer? So the truth is that we're not going to quote a Ramban. But the Ramban, he actually writes over there in a place. So I once looked it up. And the Ramban writes over there that he says that Ein ani mitzadaiti Yodea Pirush there. So I said, the Ramban writes an amazing thing. He said, mitzad my own das, I don't know what the pshat is here. Right? I said, and the Parlis brings the Ramban, and the Parlis says that what the Ramban is doing, he's just being, how do you call it, Anova. And what the Ramban means to say that when you come to Emes Elikus, you can only talk mitzad Kabbalah. You can only talk what you know, what you've been taught. Mitzad Kabbalah. In simple Svara, you can't mish. You can't say, well, why isn't it like this or why isn't it like that? First of all, you hear what it is and you know what it is. Then afterwards, you try to arrange it in the most ordered way possible. That's the Ramban. So come along the Ramban, and he says, what is it, Taich? Pirush Ramban, Zal, Sha'afu Pishat Vorim, Yesh Lahem Shir Umida, Vahem Eser, Oisa Mida, Sheesh Lahem, Ein Lo Sof. Adka. This is the Ramban. Advorim Yesh Lahem Shir Umida, Vahem Eser. Yeah. Oisa Mida, Sheesh Lahem, Ein Lo Sof. Pirush, the Ramban is saying 2 in Yorim. He's saying that whenever we say Midos and Eser, we mean after we've already, as it were, put down the Yesod, Sheyesh Lohem Shir Umida. What is the Shir Umida? That they don't literally, how do you call it, Ein Malchus Negas Pechavata. One king can't interfere with another. He doesn't border onto the kingdom of another. In other words, that each one's got his own inyan. That's Chochmah, and that's Chesed, and that's Gvura, and that's like we saw in Torah, that was the problem. Each one's got its own inyan. And therefore, that's what the Ramban means by saying that they are inyan for Shir. However, he said, what does it mean that they have an inyan for Shir? From that, it comes that they Haim Eser. And therefore, since each one of them has got an inyan for Gvul, is a simon that there is Gvul in Atzilas. Yeah. And therefore, Eser is also Gvul. The Eser, in fact, that you say 10 and not 11, like it's brought down in the same Sefer Yetzirah, a little bit later. It's written, when we say Eser v'loi Teisha, Eser v'loi Chadasah. It's Tavki Eser. It's not 9 and it's not 11. It's Tavki 10. Let's say the Ramban. Since you say that Be'emes they have Midah v'Shir that interdifferentiates them one from the other, and therefore you get to the sin that they can be 10. And therefore, he starts off by saying that they're Esesphere, that's like a Gezerah, and then he says that they're Blima, the Mishnah, in Sefer Yetzirah, and then it says, Midos on Eser, yeah, and then he says, She'en Lahem, yeah, She'en Lahem say. So the Ramban links the fact that they're Esespheres, and he said they're Blima. They're like Esespheres and they're Blima, and that leads me to a certain concept. Then I say that their Midah is Eser, and then, yeah, I'm comfortable in saying that Ein Lahem. So Pirush Adova, that the Esespheres with Blima teaches me that each one is a divine presence in Chokhmah. In other words, that the Eibishter has linked himself with the union of the Gevul Shebedvarim Eileh, and therefore they become Chokhmah, but not Chokhmah the way it is in Biyah. This becomes this Chesed, but not Chesed the way it is in Biyah. And then you can say that Midoson Eser, that each of them is got its own Midah, and they're also ruled by a certain number. Eser not 9, Eser not Chesed. However, that doesn't stop them being Adain. So Pirush Adova, each one of them in its own Indian is Adain. So each one is Mishpashet Ad Ein Say. Therefore, is that the Lashon Blima means that each one of them, yeah, is a certain Indian, because the very fact that you say they're Blima means that they have Shaykhs too. The fact you can come along and say they're not Ma means that they are Ma. So what does it mean Blima? It means that they're not Ma the way they are down here by us. Over they are, yeah, they are something. In other words, that they're divine Chokhmah, that how the Eibishter united himself with the Indian folk from Chokhmah, but not in a way that we can possibly understand it. And so, that's the Indian of divine, that's the Indian from divine Chokhmah. Therefore, that's what the Rizal said, that when we say that Torah is Chokhmah, then we mean that the Torah is Noivelis Chokhmah Shalom Eilam. You know what Noivelis is? Little leftovers that drip off something, you know, little nothings that they drip over. And our whole, the Torah comes down to us, and we're able to appreciate Torah. That's only Noivelis, that it's just little drippings and drops that have no real entity from the Chokhmah of the Eibishter, Chokhmah Iluah, how it is in Atzilus. In other words, that it's a Chokhmah, a divine Chokhmah, but we have no idea what type of Chokhmah that is, and those are the Pshat, yeah, Bli Ma. It's Ma, but it's Bli Ma. And then you can say, oh, they're already in some sort of Gvul, so that's what gives them Eser. How can all that be? But they are, each one of them believes so. Each one of them believes so. That Kufa we can't really understand. How there can be a Chokhmah ad Ein Sof. He comes in a Chokhmah ad Ein Sof Mamish. That's also hard to understand. And therefore we have to say that that's Mitzat Eivshe. He can make a Chokhmah which is ad Ein Sof. And therefore, the Pardes writes in one of his chapters when I get to the whole in and the spheres, that he says however you're going to understand the spheres, however you change the pancake one way or the other, ultimately with all the beauty which he himself gives, he said ultimately speaking it's all in and of Amunah, it's all like amazing nuances of the omnipotence of the Eibishter. He's just sort of moving all his omnipotence inside these spheres, nit, it's all the in of Amunah in the omnipotence of Hashem, and therefore they're called in the Zohar Kodesh the Esespheres. The Alter brings it in Shara Yud in Perek Tes or Yud, that the spheres are called Rosa de Mehemanusa. The spheres are called the secret of Amunah. In other words, to just say, oh yes, I believe in the Eibishter, that's Givaldik, everybody can do that. Yeah, that's ultimately speaking, that's Amunah the easy way. Over to believe that the such thing as Tefillah, the Razat Kizot, that maybe there aren't any, you start to believe that you can do anything, that's what you call Tefillah. So of course we say there are Tefillahs, to believe in that you got to have Samuna. How the Eibush can be Ein Sof, and he can still have Chokhmah, and yet that Gufa can be Ein Sof. Chokhmah Bli Sof, what is Chokhmah Bli Sof? You tell a person, no, Chokhmah Bli Sof. You want to know what the heck on earth you're talking about. And if I come to is that somebody who's an Emes Chacham, Yeah, he knows that the Torah, there's no way. It's Harikot, it's a Fafalna business. You know, you spend the whole of your life, minute after minute, learning Torah, and you'll never really get anywhere. But be careful of him, he'll be putting in an official complaint. you can never really get anywhere because it's all in an oven for name sake. It's all in an oven for name sake. And the fact, in Samech, I think we looked at it, I don't know if any of the guys were here, in Samech, the Rebbe says that the more you begin to understand Elokus, the more you begin to know that you don't know anything. Otherwise, it's absolute gone. And the more you become a Boki and Nifla and Hallelujah, the more you know you don't know nothing. And you just have to believe Emunah Pshuta. And maybe you can only believe that Emunah Pshuta when you have all that problem. You know? So when you got all these problems, then you believe it. Then you believe Emunah Pshuta.
Don't say by Chachma that a Ha'ara comes into Chachma because it's like a Kli?
Yes, Nachon. If you're talking about something which is Mamish ain't safe, then that Ha'ara is not Mashana, the ain't safe. And that we'll see a little bit later. There's all sorts of inyonim here. We'll sort of do it step by step. Or we'll do it a little bit later. Of a so-called it is only a Ha'ara. Of it's a Ha'ara Elokis. It's a Ha'ara Mamish Girui oil from the Moya Mamish. And Afu Pikain, it's Chacham. So I mean, just imagine trying to understand that. I mean, you just spend your whole life learning until you never really know what the heck you're doing. You know? And that's why Siddim always, they always, in the end, they're very simple, Mesilas Nefesh type of people, because they know that in the end, when the pressure's really on, you just got to go with the Emunah Pshuta. You'll never really figure the whole thing out anyway. You just got to go with the Emunah Pshuta. The whole thing you have to learn. The Eibusher wants you to learn, like we saw. He wants you to have some kesher with him, so he teaches a tremendous chesed. Ultimately speaking, what he's giving you, the original, so that's all he just leftovers, boy. Don't kid yourself. As I come to it, Erfa says the Rebbe that the Einem Shariyim safe Adkan. This is the Ramban. Now, can you blame the Ramban? He's got the gumption to say a thing like that. Just before that, he writes that Ani Loi having the Ramban right. The Ramban himself says, I didn't understand all this, but this is what I got to say. So the Pardes writes about it. The Pardes says, he said, HaChosid HaGodel HaRamban, that's what he calls him. He said, Hu Noag Avan Nasusi Be'atmi. He was very modest about himself. Anyway, sure. V'hainu, Masha ain't safe l'spashtuson. I mean, we just said that they got a middle of a shear, and they have at least an interdividing entity in them, which is Chachmach, I said. So that means that they can just go Arein Sof. Ishpashtus means that the Chachmach just is Mishpashet Arein Sof, and Chesed is Mishpashet Arein Sof. The begin is a Chachmach, Ishpashtus, begin is Bligvo. Gelijk met Chachmach Lamata, she is Gvul is Pashtus. It's not like our Chachmach down here. The Ad Poitove Vasu, and more, not Ad Poitavo. Up to here you can come, Vasu. Well, you can't go any further. Or in the Chachma, the Eibusher, it's not like that. No, his Chachma just, it's just going and going and going, I believe. And maybe you could give a dukma. I remember once I was talking to a guy, I think I told you, I was talking to a guy in England once. I was sitting at a function, I didn't really understand what I was doing at that function. All of a sudden the guy alongside me, he starts chatting, away. And all of a sudden he says to me, he said, I take a lot of interest in these things. And he told me a whole thing that they thought at a certain point, not so long ago in history, they thought that the universe eventually must have an end. It must come. They even pictured to themselves where it all finishes or something. So they had these unbelievable cameras and mice. I don't know how they do it. And they got some sort of way of viewing what they thought was the end of the whole universe. And all of a sudden they see that beyond that, they see the whole, as it were, continuation of the universe starting all over again. They see, another galaxies and galaxies of question was after what they saw. You follow? That's what he told me. He said, what did he say to that? I said, well, it's an understandable thing. It's written in the Hasidic teaching. He says, what? I said, yeah, it's written in Hasidic teaching. He said, everything is limited, but it's ad ain't safe. The limitation goes ad ain't safe, mamish. I said, it comes from the Eivishter. What is ain't safe? And Eivishter's wisdom, and not our wisdom. The Eivishter put it in my mouth. He said, wow. He said, that's right. He said, isn't that amazing? He said, really, everything is unlimited. He said, it's all limited, but it's unlimited. And I said, yeah, it's unbelievable. And that was the conversation we had. And then I realized why I had to go to that function. I would never start up the conversation. He started with me. I was listening there. I'm trying to sort of, in a very dignified way enjoy what's going on, And all of a sudden, he sort of leans over to me. He said, "No, Rabbi, what do you say about this?" He said, "You must have learned a bit. You must say this." And he starts this whole business about the universe, what they thought, Anyway, he said the latest opinion is that they have given up. They say that the universe is just no way that it'll ever finish. They've given up. That they'll ever find the end of it. That's what he told me. I don't know what you guys. Anyway, it comes to us that ain't safe is pashtusum. Yeah, that the healer matter, Chachman zat pray velay tove, that's a lie. In the Eivus is Chachman, it says, Mashehim begins Chachman dat zielers, ein gvul his pashtusum. Dim hi yoise begins Chachman. Mikol mochim ein la gvul Sure, how can that possibly be? I know Lefishe he elakus mamish, lochen ein safeless pas to some. There's two inyanim here. The one inyan is that the etzem chokhmah is divine. It's another type of chokhmah. Antu chachim avalev chokhmah yadir. Don't think you can mission your ideas of chokhmah into that. Allah. And zweitens is everything Eloki is believed so. And that chokhmah is that ain't. I was it the gvul of the kelim. The gvul of the kelim is that it's chokhmah, not something. Those are the picture of the Ramban. That's how he understands that Mishnah and the Sefer Yitzhak. So you wanted to say you got it. I don't know if you wanted it. Nobody asked me if we should learn the subject. Anyway, we should realize that these are very basic inonim. They're very simple inonim, basically. Because if you don't sort these sort of things out, you're always likely to find somewhere afternoon to get takua. All of a sudden you'll be like and say, "Wait a minute, what's going on around here?" You know the story of the chassid, the Friedrich Rebbe let him into the garden. You don't know the story of the man? Yeah. He said he wants, can he go into the garden of the Rebbe's house? Because there's a nice seat there, and there's like a tree, and he's come from a journey, and he wants to take a rest. So I said, of course. He was a very, his name was David Vilenka, that guy. Yeah, David Chaim Vilenka. But the guys, and the Rebbe let him in, the Friedrich Rebbe, and then he went off to Cheder. And the Friedrich went off to Cheder. And he comes back hours later. It was a long summer day, and it wasn't dark yet. And all of a sudden, to his surprise, he sees this chassid still sitting on the bench. I said, that's funny. It's only a few hours here. What's he been doing over there? So all of a sudden, he sees it's time for mincha. So he thinks he should go over and tell him that maybe we should wake him up. Tell him we should go and do mincha. So he gets over there and he sees that the fellow's hat is on the bench. He said the guy's sitting straight and his head's up. All of a sudden he saw he's not asleep. He saw that that's definitely not a pose. I'm sure he was asleep. He saw he's not asleep. So he said, what? No. All of a sudden the Friedrich realized that he was just thinking Elokus. He was thinking of Elokus. And he got so taken up in thinking Elokus that he just sat there for hours. His mind was absolutely dog in Elokus. So the Friedrich went over to him and he touched him on the cuff of his garment. He said, pull the cuff of his garment. So suddenly he sort of looked down and he said, yeah, what can I help you? And he said, Rabbi, so I'm just wanted to tell you it's another half an hour to Mincha. Yeah, maybe you should think about davening Mincha or something like that. So she said, he made out as if, it was a bit. But the truth is, said the Friedrich, he probably would have come out to daven Mincha anyway. It wouldn't have been a contradiction. But he thanked the Friedrich. He said, thank you very much for telling me. And he put on his hat. He sort of holding himself in a standing position, and he sort of walked off in a very businesslike way. Also, Friedrich Rebbe realized that I've been away for about 4 hours, 3.5 hours, 4 hours. And he's been sitting on this bench, and he's been thinking eloquence all the time. Yeah, so that's once upon a time what the city used to do. So they used to bother their heads with these signorim. Let's get moving. Once upon a time, the city used to take this sort of thing very seriously. That's why he's saying so for all right, so he said, well, if he must cause a parlish, a gimo perek dalid, בפרש משנה זו, meaning אסס פירס בלימה, יש להם הכוונה שאסס פירס הן רק כוח הגבול, והיינו רק כוח המגביל, לי יש בבחינס הגבול חוץ לאצילס, אבל האצילס גופה אין בבחינס גבול. והיינו, לא יהיה בבחינס הגבולה דחוכמה וחסד, אלא לעניין חוכמה כוח המגביל. צריך למה שזו דרך she's born come on being seichel mufla. So with that I'll leave you guys to have a good evening. And here we see a most amazing thing that I really broke my head to find it in the Pardes. But later I saw, at the beginning I couldn't figure where to really get it from the Pardes. But then later on I saw. And there's an amazing thing that the Rebbe is going to say that in the next few lines that he hasn't got the Sefer with him right now. The Sefer on him tzartzli ko'ez, yet nonetheless he's right always. So you can see how they function. And in the Sefer Chanoik Lana, the Rebbe Rashab writes that he didn't hardly learn the Sefer Kabbalah. He started to Lo lamad Klal Sefer Kabbalah, he learned Divrei Rabbi Sein and you can see he just brings all the Sefer Kabbalah like he was just seeing them on the blackboard. I thought that was an impressive. Anyway, what does the Pardes say? The Pardes says that it's all just kuyach. It's not any gvul at all in Atzilus. Atzilus, it is a possibility that there will be gvul chutz in Atzilus. I had to say, what's it the Chochmah in Atzilus? You say there's Chochmah in Atzilus. So he said, there will be Seichel Mufla. We'll see about that as we go along. What Seichel Mufla means that there's no way you'll ever understand it's completely and utterly moved up, and it's in even from Shlilas Kola Asikli, and yet nonetheless we call it Seichel. So that's how the Pardes is going to hold. So he's going to hold the most amazing thing. And the truth of the matter is that when you sort it all out, Pardes, oddly enough, looks to be the most straightforward way. Over the Alter Rebbe doesn't hold that way. He's going to bring the Alter Rebbe a bit later. And the strange thing is that the Alter Rebbe takes a very tricky path here. The Alter Rebbe's got a very interesting opinion about this whole thing. And we're going to have to sort of try and shape in our minds, why did the Alter Rebbe go that way? For us to say going that way. The way the Pardes sorts it all out is very, very good. Geschmack. All right, good. So if I have a deputation will come up to my room and say that listen, we can't learn this